They don't listen anyway. If you notice, they're still. If everybody wants to grab their coffee and whatever they're eating and come sit down, we're going to get started. There'll be plenty of time afterwards to network and socialize. Also, Michael's going to stay around to sign the book and to talk to you more in depth. If you have questions, as is, I'm assuming everyone else on the panel. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to get started to just kind of get through some of the initial thank yous. We want to thank the Hotel Indigo as our host. Distinguished guest, Assemblywoman Jody Giglio, thank you for attending today. The sponsors today for the event, National Grid is our event sponsor. The breakfast sponsor is B. Shapiro Financial. And I got a text this morning, he has a flat tire and we'll be here shortly. So as one of the texts, the panel sponsors, HSBC and Mazars USA. So thank you very much for helping us put all these events on. Some of the other corporate sponsors that we have, Brown Altman, B. Shapiro, Compel CEOs, Hotel Indigo, Mazars, Nixon Peabody, Water Lilies, and Witham. Without them, we couldn't put these different events that we have on. Also in your pamphlet is our next event, which is a summer celebration on top of the rooftop in Arizona Iced Tea. So we are back in person and it is outdoors, so we hope we will see you all there. I want to thank you all for attending today's Food Council Educational Series event. We're proud to present this program focusing on the relationship between food and climate change. I'd like to thank our special guest, Michael Hoffman, author of Our Changing Menu, Climate Change and Food We Love and Need. Randy Shubin-Dresner, President and CEO of Island Harvest Food Bank, will provide some opening remarks. Augie Ruckenshell from the Suffolk County Department of Economic Development and Planning, a longtime friend, and we kind of wish you well on wherever your endeavors are. I know, for those that don't know, he'll be new challenges, as we say, correct? Opportunities, always opportunities, never anything else, so we wish you well. And in addition, we have a panel of experts from our region who will share their invaluable experience and resources with us. So with that, I'd like to invite Randy up here and do some opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Okay. It's a little thing hanging here. Good morning, everybody.
You guys here? Because I know the mic's a little...
Is it a little low?
Well, it's good for me.
I know.
So I can't.
I could do
It's
that.
a work in progress.
Yeah, that's all good. I could do that. I'm going to move it forward, too.
Would you rather bring us in?
No, we're good. We're good. I'm going to talk right into the microphone. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And Michael, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning and give some opening remarks. Island Harvest began some 30 years ago with a keen eye and an act of kindness. Our founder knew that her local convenience store had excess food that would go to waste at the end of each day, and that there was a women's shelter just down the road whose residents sorely needed that food. It wasn't rocket science that put those two instances together, but it did take foresight and heart. At that time, there were many naysayers who didn't believe her idea of creating a bridge for those who had excess food and those who needed it. Our founder and original volunteers had true insight on how to solve two complex problems: hunger and excess food. Sorry. That initial vision was not just the start of what would become Long Island's leading food bank, but an insight into something much bigger: the vast ecosystem of our food supply chain. Our growth and development symbolize the benefits of recognizing a challenge and understanding that there are solutions to be found. Let's consider climate change and our food system in the same way. How are they related, and how do the challenge of one impact the other? There is a unique and complex relationship between them both that requires our attention at this very moment in time. Today's presentation and discussion is going to begin to unpack this relationship and give us some insight into a unique opportunity for cause and effect of needed change. Island Harvest has evolved from a humble model of picking up excess surplus food and immediately delivering them to a network of nonprofit organizations. Our years of service to our neighbors in need has given rise to innovative programming that does more than just fill people's bellies. We're tackling root causes of hunger and food insecurity, then acting on our discovering findings. Our response to the COVID-19 pandemic was one example, pivoting our model in response to a new demand, doubling our output and supporting more than 500,000 families that were in need all across Long Island. And now, having created community empowerment programs that provide the right referrals and assistance to people based on what they tell us, not what we think they need. We have rolled out Nutrition Pathways program to understand more about the intersection of healthy foods and healthy living. From taking away the barriers to food shopping, learning how to cook food, and understanding food's relationship to chronic illnesses. But as Island Harvest Food Bank has shifted and grown as new needs arise, we have realized even bigger dreams, and we know that this can only be accomplished with partnerships and collaborations. From our friends in farming, the many suppliers we work with, and those in transportation and policymaking. It's not just the nonprofit sector, in fact. All sectors must collaborate and find unique partnerships to remain current. You'll hear today about some of these affiliations and some of these partnerships. We should all acknowledge that we rely on each other not only for shared expertise, but because the only way supply chains will continue to work is if we continuously feed and support each other. Today you will hear how agriculture, government, conservationists, community organizations, and others work together to acknowledge our changing menu and to exploring new ways for change. In the 1980s, the vision of a food bank was much different than it is today. At that time, it was believed that simply filling bellies was the only goal, no matter what we filled the bellies with: soda, cakes, breads, sugary foods, and canned foods. But over time, we've learned that our neighbors needed more than simply a can of food to get by. They need access to culturally sensitive foods, fresh foods, supports and services. They need to become skilled in jobs that pay better than a living wage. They need access to safe childcare so they could go to work without stress. Is a food bank a convener of ideas and solutions to enable people to become self-sufficient? I would say yes. We are all these things. A food bank in today's world is providing bold programming to end hunger in holistic ways with broad spectrums of partnerships, much like the Long Island Food Council is convening all of us together today with important discussions that we will have today. Partnerships have allowed Island Harvest to be the steward of regenerative farming and a greenhouse on the campus of the Sisters of St. Joseph's in Brentwood, the mentorship of the Peconic Land Trust, Cornell Cooperative Extension, the Long Island Farm Bureau, New York State Ag and Markets, and of course the wonderful sisters at the Sisters of St. Joseph's have taught us how to use our farm to serve as a learning model to provide increased access to healthy produce for thousands of Long Islanders impacted by food insecurity. Last year, we grew 17 varieties of fruits, vegetables, and herbs, yielding thousands of pounds of fresh foods for our neighbors in need. The farm allows us to extend our hunger relief work, incorporating the opportunity to grow healthy organic food while creating a unique model to teach children and adults about growing their own fresh produce. Last year, we educated more than 950 people on sustainable growing techniques. Through our regenerative farming work, we learned about the farming with indigenous produce with a model known as the Three Sisters method, where nothing can grow or sustain itself alone. I believe this is the sort of metaphor for today's discussion and how we all need to work together. You see, for centuries, 3 very specific crops have been the center of Native American agriculture and culinary traditions. It is for good reason, as these 3 crops complement each other in the garden as well as nutritionally. You see, corn provides tall stalks for the beans to climb so that they are not outcompeted by sprawling squash vines. Beans provide nitrogen to fertilize the soil while stabilizing the tall corn during heavy winds. Beans are nitrogen fixers, meaning they host a special bacterium that could take much-needed plant nutrients from the air and convert it into a form that could be absorbed by plant roots. The large leaves of squash plants shade the ground, which helps retain soil moisture and preventing weeds. We can learn many important lessons to build our businesses and our understanding of climate change and our changing menu from this very simple way of farming. It's about how trust, collaboration, dependence on one another can build a momentum for change. Working with nature can be challenging, intuitive, and humbling, but it typically makes sense, and it depends, just as Island Harvest does, on its relationship with those around it to thrive. Thank you very much.
Mike Hoffman, excuse me. You ready?
You bet.
All right. Everybody read the book already?
Who have
Good
it?
answer. Good answer.
I guess everybody knows me since you've read the book, and right? It's also nice to see a lot of copies floating around. Thank you, Michael, for this opportunity. Just working, okay? Opportunity to be here, actually to be in person instead of doing a Zoom over and over and over. We're all kind of tired of that. And it's also nice just to hear all the conversations before we start. And thank you, Randy, for your inspiring words. I have to follow that. So I was asked to give the big picture on climate change. And it's a big picture. I'm going to talk about facts, the truth, not any misinformation. And I like this quote from Edward Abbey. Better a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion. So we have a slight technical issue here this morning. So my partner of 50 years will be advancing the slides. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry about this. I give a lot of lectures on campus. I have to wear a mask. So I put this up to tell the students show what I really look like. Next slide. Okay, why me? Why is Mike up here? I'm pictured up there milking a cow in Costa Rica on a holiday. And I milked the cow dry in about 3 minutes. And the cheesemaker, who owned 9 cows, beautiful little place, and the guide was just blown away. It was like riding a bike. I grew up milking a cow every morning, every night on our little 1-cow farm in Wisconsin, and you never forget how to milk a cow. Up in the upper left-hand corner of that image, there's also this big rubber bladder, and the farmer it was an anaerobic digester, putting manure in there, producing methane that actually went to the cheese house. I got excited about the manure. Needless to say, I was a bit of an unusual guest on that farm. But that's what I grew up with, small farm. My mother made butter, that was the milk for the house. And yes, I had to milk the damn cow every morning, every night, but it was a good life. I spent years in California, so I've seen huge agriculture. Grew up on a little farm, worked in agriculture in New York, so my experience in agriculture is fairly broad. I was in multiple leadership roles at Cornell University, and if you're in one of those kind of positions, you better see the big picture. Climate change is one of them. Spend a little, I'm a parent. There's a real personal side to climate change. That's what keeps me going. Spent a little time in that organization, the Marine Corps, veteran of the Vietnam War. That helps a lot with certain audiences. And finally, I like to drink and eat, or eat and drink, whatever the order. And that's what this story is all about. Next slide. Climate change. You see that orange band on the surface of the Earth? That's where we live. Anybody want to guess how tall it is? How high?
2 miles? 2 miles?
That's unfair. 7. It's really a thin little layer. Clouds form, snow falls, rain falls, climate change is in that little space. That is it. Solar radiation comes down, hits the surface of the Earth, warms it up, and you get radiant energy goes up. It encounters greenhouse gases, they capture it and re-radiate it in all directions. The problem is we're putting more and more greenhouse gases in that thin layer, more insulation, it's warming up. Warming up that thin layer, the globe is warming. Global warming. Next slide. An example. If you want to see what this layer looks like when you're on a commercial flight going across the country and the pilot says, we're now at cruising speed, look down. You are looking through the 7 miles. That's it. Next slide. And if you're walking to work at Cornell University before the sun is up and you look up and you see jet trails, that's it. You're looking up through the 7 miles. Next slide. Key terms. People get this confused. The globe is warming. It's resulting in changes in the climate. I lived in Ithaca for 30 years. Winters are warming. The climate has changed. It's long-term trends up to 30 years. The weather is what's happening outside right now. And we can have a cold winter. And someone will say, well, global warming, climate change, that's not happening. That's weather. Next slide. You've all seen this hockey stick graph of the last 1,000 years. The Industrial Revolution starts in the late 1800s, and this is CO2 specifically. It's going straight up. We're 50% higher than we should be. Just came out yesterday, we're the highest in 4 million years on the planet we live on. About a year ago, 422 parts, today 422 parts per million CO2. A year ago, 417. We add about 3 a year. Experts agree, it's almost unanimous. We're the cause. It is not natural, and it's happening fast. Next slide. Another way to look at this. Think of the atmosphere as a bathtub. Yes, that's me. And so the atmosphere is filling up with greenhouse gases. Just think of the bathtub, the same thing. You got the faucet. Before the Industrial Revolution, the faucet was just right, adjusted just right, and the drain was right, so the tub was stable. Now, you got the faucet cranked up, the drain is a little more constricted, the bathtub is filling up. Our goal now is to stabilize it, but it will be at a higher level. Next slide. That's our point. We're not going to turn this around right away. The idea is to not let it get any worse, to stabilize it. Where do these things come from? We love to fly, over 107,000 flights a day worldwide, 1.4 billion motor vehicles running around. There's my lovely 1993 Volvo that someone made me get rid of. Well, the door fell off and other things. It was rusting away. It was the right thing. But transportation, 29% of greenhouse gases. Electricity, industry, 23%. Commercial, residential, agriculture in the U.S., this is on-farm emissions, about 10%. You hear this big figure, almost 30% globally, but that's the food system. That's everything.
That's a question there.
Yes,
Does that include the transportation?
the 10%?
Yeah.
No, this is just on-farm. Globally, you transportation, processing,
Transportation of the
storage.
farm goods is not included in that.
not in this.
The global transportation of all the farm goods is not included in the overall 10%.
The EPA figures, this is just on-farm, does not include transportation. Next.
I'm sorry, when you say transportation, is it moving people or moving animals up there? up to 29%.
Well, that's everything, that's us.
That's just cargo too.
Yep, yep. Next slide. Okay, evidence is all around us. Melting glaciers, they're important for hydroelectric power, et cetera. The oceans are rising. Half of that is just because warm water takes up more space. The rest is from melting glaciers, ice caps. You know about the fires. Upper left is summer sea ice. The yellow band or yellow lines where the sea ice should be at the end of the summer, the end of the season, so to speak. And you can see where the white is, that's where it is. The distance, the area between that is about the size of Alaska. And the sun is warming up that water because now it's exposed, melts more ice, you get the picture. Eventually, summer ice will disappear. Next slide. Greenland's losing, honestly, I can't remember, 300 gigatons of ice every year. That's a gigaton, and that's the Empire State Building, to give you an idea how much ice that is. It's a lot of ice. Next slide. How many of you have hugged a redwood? Good. They're hard not to. The largest, almost the largest creature on the planet, and they're dying too because of climate change. Both drought, but also bark beetles that are infesting a lot of trees out west, and they've taken out Lazarus that should have lived another 500 years. Lazarus is gone. Next slide. Did you give me, Michael, an hour and a half? No, okay. Where did you go? Where is Michael?
I didn't do it.
Okay. These are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that have come out over since last year and this year. They paint a pretty grim picture. And by the way, I'm going to pause. We're on a roller coaster ride. We're going down right now. We're going to come back up. Okay? But we really have to act fast, like reduce greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 50% in 91 months. But we can do this. That's what one of the reports said. This is what you need to do. We just need the will, and we can make the difference that we need. And countries like us, the U.S., need to step up. Next slide. It's tough on the younger folks. This is a national or global survey of 10,000 individuals between 16 and 25. 3/4 of them describe their future as frightening because of climate change. A lot of them are really considering whether or not to have children. And I asked this question often in front of student audiences. In one word, describe your future. The last time, from the back, the first word was hopeless. But once in a while, you'll find someone that says something like passionate. Because that individual had discovered what they want to do to make the world a better place, and that's where they're headed. They just needed to know what to do. And this whole thing of eco-anxiety is on the rise, especially among youth. Next slide. So how do you talk about climate change? I already did it. I touched on personal. There's human health issues. The economy is affected, the environment, and then there's food. Next slide. Why food? How many of you eat? We all eat. It's relevant. It's part of our cultures, family traditions. You can get emotional about food. I do. It's enjoyable. And those things called social lubricants. I love them. Alcoholic beverages, to be specific. Important to the economy, and we talk about it. People talk about food a lot. So the stories one can tell are unlimited. And the audience for this story is the U.S. and other rich countries, because we mostly are responsible for the mess, and we have the capacity to make a difference. Next slide. Where does it come from? How many know where Brazil nuts come from? Most Brazil nuts are grown in Bolivia. Spices. India. Great. Sesame seeds. Tanzania, 40%. Most people don't, they think it's Wegmans.
Vanilla.
Madagascar and Indonesia. So, where's it come from? Well, could go to the local farmer's market. It's a producer nearby. The young woman on the right is actually pollinating vanilla. Every single flower has to be hand pollinated. The gentleman here in Wisconsin producing milk for us. The gentleman in the middle is an Aussie producing grass-fed beef for the US because most of our grass-fed beef comes from Australia. Lower left, one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, fishing in the Bering Sea. And lower right, a family producing cacao for our chocolate, making $4 a day. Next slide. Oh, great. Now how do we get her to our table? Through canals, transport, trains, but there's this great paper came out of Chatham House a few years ago, and they call them choke points. Vast amount of produce moved through narrow straits, and they're at risk. We just saw the Suez Canal a while back blocked. Well, that's the future. A variety of things. For a country, maybe, hey, wait a minute, there's food going by. We want that food right here. We're going to take over the canal. Political and social unrest. Next slide. And you saw this already, but if you now look at the opening of the Arctic sea ice, you can now transport goods, food, from northern Asia to northern Europe in 40% less time. So it's actually a positive, if you can see that, coming out of retreating Arctic sea ice. Next slide. Okay.
Question there? I'm sorry, it's so exciting to be here, actually. Do you talk about the price of diesel gasoline on the movement of those ships too, right now, considering, you know, what it takes to actually move those ships, each one of them from a diesel gasoline perspective also, because they're all diesel combustible engines on every one of those ships, adding to the dire need here, if you will, right?
Right.
What's the price of diesel versus the price of gasoline on the street right now? Right?
How about
I'm sorry, I'm just excited. So,
Yes.
right in my alley.
shipping on the oceans is actually one of the more efficient ways to get things around. And I've just had the fortune to be working with somebody from Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, and they're actually, it's not greenwashing, they're actually making huge changes. So how about we defer till when I'm done? Okay. How many have killed plants, like house plants? Forget to water them, put them by the window, it gets too hot. Well, a plant needs air, carbon dioxide. It needs water, it needs the right temperature, it needs soil and sunlight, but everything is changing except sunlight. Next slide. Increasing carbon dioxide. You'll hear, oh, that's great for farming, because it actually has a fertilization effect on plants. They grow faster, they grow bigger, but the consensus is that's nice, but increasing storms are going to negate that gain. Weeds will become harder to control. At some point, Roundup won't work, glyphosate, in the future because the CO2 levels will be too high. When it comes to human nutrition, there'll be 30% less B vitamins in rice, and millions of people depend on rice around the world. That's a big one. Essential minerals are declining, will decline with increase in CO2. And finally, changes in colors and flavors. Kale may taste better in the future. It's actually, there's another slide I didn't include it, but it's a long list of all the changes that will occur in vegetables alone, not all of which are bad. But it's amazing, because you're feeding that plant with all this extra CO2, and its world is different. Next slide. Water. Where it falls, when it falls, how it falls will change. More downpours, droughts, storms increasing. More rain, less snow. It's warmer. Less snow. That affects the snowpack out west, for example. And ice melts. Peru and Chile, we import $5 billion worth of agricultural products a year from Peru and Chile. They depend on meltwaters from the ice cap. The ice cap will be gone in 20 years. How many eat blueberries in wintertime? Look at where they're coming from. Peru. Next slide. In the Northeast, we're up about 55% in heavy downpours. I think you've experienced that. That can be tough on farming. When you want to get in the field, it's just too wet. Drought, major drought in the western U.S. A lot of it is at the highest exceptional drought level. That's a big deal. And looking at the globe on the lower right, find this part of the country, the Northeast, it's blue. We will have water towards the end of the century. A lot of the rest of the country won't. I think that's an advantage for us for growing food. Next slide. And hail will get bigger. Go figure. But the little crystals, because there's more turbulence in the air, they get pushed up into the colder air and they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The greenhouse growers in the Netherlands are kind of nervous about that. Next slide. Michael, am I doing okay on time? Sorry, I don't even.
I haven't looked yet. but
Okay.
that's not-
Okay, I got another. Give me 1 second. Warming. Everybody accept that it's getting warmer? But it's not that simple. Yes, it is. Northern latitudes are warming faster than lower latitudes. So, in the US, the hardiness zone has actually all moved one zone north. We also have longer growing seasons, potential benefit for agriculture. Winters are warming twice as fast as summers, and that is a really big deal because fruit and almost all fruit and all nut crops need a dormant winter period when it's cold enough such that they become dormant. If they don't produce. Georgia, the peach state, lost 85% of their peaches a couple of years ago because the previous winter was too warm. Avocado, or what are those things? Yeah, those things. Pistachios. California growers lost about 300 million also a few years ago because the previous winter was too cold. They didn't have a crop. So warming winters are a big deal. Even warming nights affect like rice, yield production in rice. And obviously heat waves do direct damage to crops. Next slide. This is an interesting paper. It's in ProPublica a couple years ago, September of 20, focused on actually human migration with the changing climate. So there we are today, and the darker green is kind of the nice place to live, not too humid, not too hot. They also include not only sort of the comfort zone for people, but also 3 major crops. Now look at 2070, where that comfort zone has moved. A lot of people are going to move too. A lot of people, because the South is just going to get too hot. Next slide. And if you want to see what it's going to be like here in 2040, 2060, it's also at this paper, and it shows every county in the US and what it'll be like between 2040 and 2060. And they have things like heat, humidity, farm yields, sea level rise, etc. So here you are. Suffolk, not bad at all, and not Tompkins County where we live is pretty good. We're not moving. If you want to see what's going to be like in the future, take a look at this. Pretty interesting. Next slide. But that also has implications for agriculture, obviously.
Where is that graph?
Next.
You just in here in the back with the graph wall.
Where is that graph? Where can you find it?
It's an article in ProPublica. I can give you, there's the link, I mean, if you wanted it. Next slide. Here we go. So what's happening to our menu? Next slide. Oh, this hurts. A couple years ago, I was invited to be a speaker at the National Craft Distillers Conference. Number one, they're worried about water. This is a water-intensive business. With the drought, the specialty brewers in California are worried because they typically use craft brewers stream water. With a drought, the mineral content of that water has changed. It affects the beer. If they drill, forget it, it's a different kind of water. It changes the flavor of the beer. Oh, the best one I like here is, anybody enjoy scotch or bourbon? Come on. No? Okay. How's this? Both. Both of those are cured in barrels that are essentially in out-of-door conditions. They're rick houses, but they're open to the outside. Currently, they lose about 2% volume by year, and that's called the Angel's share. But it amounts to 129 million gallons a year. Evaporates through the oak. It's getting warmer. The Angel's going to take more. there's many stories here. Next slide. I have no idea what that kid's doing, but thought it was a good slide. Salads. Avocado production in California is going to decline by 40% in the next 20 years. It's going to get too hot. Where do most avocados come that we eat? Anybody? Mexico. We're the largest import of avocados from Mexico. Sesame seed, I mentioned already, but it's actually a good thing for producers, the small farm producers in Tanzania, because sesame likes droughts and likes hot temperatures, so production is increasing. They're actually benefiting from it. Onions will be more pungent with increasing CO2. Lettuce production might actually increase because of warmer winters. We can grow it in more places. Next slide. Meat, red meat. You hear a lot about that. Our approach to red meat is treat it as a delicacy, not a staple. I eat red meat, but not a lot of it, as opposed to you don't have to eat, shouldn't eat meat at all. We had this in the book initially, don't eat meat, and the reviewer said, nice job, you just lost 100 million readers. Okay, it makes sense, and I can't be a hypocrite. The burger, hot cows, what I'm trying to say, they're just stories. Cheese, hot cows give less milk. I touched the beef production with all the droughts across the U.S., and 41% of our land mass in the U.S. is used for grazing. And the droughts are taking their toll. Farmers are also having to pay more for feed or bring their cattle off of grazing sooner and into the feedlot because the quality of feed on the land is just not up to par. Fish, populations are moving. Chickens, probably okay. They're produced indoors in general. Next slide. I mentioned, so for bread,